So one of the things we learned a while ago, we had a car that made 622 foot-pounds of torque to all four tires, is that the rods are kind of a weak link. But before I say weak link, that car was making over 700 foot-pounds of torque when we made the rods low compression rods. We actually squished them down a little bit. So this rod is slightly shorter than a stock one. And you can see the wear on the thrust side. See that side? And look at this side. All right. So it was not straight in the bore anymore. We were able to just, once we saw it was running a little bit rough, we pulled, we stopped the car and, brought it back and took it apart and found the rods, and that engine got a set of Potter rods. Shout out to Potter rods. We like you guys, but out of the budget this time. We're using some Silly Rabbit Motorsports rods, which look pretty cool. We know some people that have run them, and the guys at Silly Rabbit have been really, really supportive and nice. We like them. So I want to teach you a little bit about this. So this is a Mala piston. You can kind of see the M at the bottom, right? So this is a factory Mala forged piston. I measured the crown thickness, and it is 0.245. And, and the wrist pin, right? Look at that. I couldn't tell you the material on that exactly, but the wall thickness is 0.177. That's a stout pin. And when we pulled apart our motor that made the 700 and something foot-pounds of torque, the wrist pins were happy, the pistons were fine, the bores were fine, the crank was fine, all the bearings were fine. We just replaced the rods, and that motor is still running today, years and years later. On this one, we like to change the things that are necessary. So we're going to keep the factory pistons. This piston has 200,000 miles, and I can't feel anything on this. No, nothing from my nail. It's perfectly even. Then you look at the piston. Some of the coating is scraped off, but there's still plenty of coating down in the grooves. It's hard to see, still down there. And then over here too. All right, this is the side that got a little hotter, right? So we're going to reuse these, put new rings on it, and a new set of rods and bearings and everything, and off we go. Okay, so now we're going to put together our pistons and rings. So I've taken these factory pouches and separated them into cylinders. And then we have the oil control ring, the middle ring, and the top ring. And I've checked in each individual bore in the block to set the end gaps, and that's what they actually are in each cylinder that they're in. Corresponding piston, cylinder 1, rings for cylinder 1. I also have rods for cylinder 1, all as like their own little sub-assemblies. So let's put this together. So first, we'll do the oil control ring. Which, first we put the spring in, and this kind of looks, see this little thin part? Goes in like that. It's easier if I'm not playing with the camera. You can go over, and it goes in the bottom. And just sort of push that together. Put a little oil in here too. Take out our oil control ring, and just for giggles, you can see that the Audi oil control ring, it's not two separate rails, it's one piece. I don't know if you can see the little holes in there, but yeah, you can see in the back right there. You can see there, right? I always check them for burrs before I put them in, just to check them like that. And especially the ends, right? Right. And these particular rings are made by Goitza. I don't think you can see it, but right about there where my dirty thumb is, you can kind of see you can make out the name there, but anyways, that's where the name is. So this is a really low tension ring, so we're going to put this on. 180 degrees off this. So here's where this thing goes together. this ring with the goitza facing the top is going to go 180 degrees opposing that. Now it's important not to stretch these very much. Now this ring is a very low tension ring relative to the compression rings, so I'm using my fingers here. I've done this a few times, so if you haven't, use the expander. I'll show you that when we get to the top rings. Be slow and gentle. You don't want to overexpand these things. So now it's on and happy, and I'll lube these things up with a little bit of oil in a minute once we get everything in, so I'm not making a mess. But I can feel when I spin it that there's no burrs. It's just smooth, because we really spent a lot of time cleaning these up, because these are used pistons, as you can tell. And if you look in the ring grooves, they're very clean. So thank you, Simple Green, and some elbow grease from Brent. Alright, so there's bottom ring. Let's do the middle ring. Now is when we break out our funny tool. So on the middle ring, on these you can see the name. The name, and it also says top over here. You make that out. Right? And then also you can see there's a step on the bottom. So that goes towards the bottom. This doesn't matter so much. We're clocking yet. We're going to get to that in a bit. I bought this cheapo expander. Not fancy, but it does the job. If it makes you feel important, you can go buy the Snap-on one. But this one works fine. Go slow so you don't scratch everything up. Slow, slow, slow. Again, we just spin it. You see that it's, even without any oil, it's free. And from prior, you can see that I checked all the end gaps before we got to this point, as far as, that's not the end gaps, but the ring groove to ring clearance. We checked with the feeler gauge earlier. It was well within spec. Now top ring. I take them out one at a time out of these. And same thing with the top ring. See the name right there? No name on the bottom. All right. The compression rings, like this one, is really stiff. I mean, you can feel when you try and expand it, it doesn't want to. So, these are a fancy little $10 ring expander. Go slow. Sorry guys, I'm a little out of practice here, but we'll get it going. Just go slow. Don't let your pride mess with you to make a mistake. There we go. Again, they rotate nicely. No funny burrs. Now we're going to use a little bit of our magic brush. A little bit of engine oil. Just two seconds, Brent. I'm not going to worry about clocking these at the moment, but we'll get to that in a bit. Alright, so we know on cylinder 1 that the tangs go towards the middle of the engine, and we know that this arrow, you can see that there, points towards the timing belt. Right? So that would mean that this rod goes like that. Right, let's take our wrist pin out. Now we'll just go ahead and slide this in, make sure there's no burrs. I should have done that earlier, but here we are. Ah, happy. And I don't know how to describe it, but you can just kind of feel when it kind of slides in that it just kind of, look at that. See, some engines you pay extra to have like a floating pin, but again, you know, thank you, Germany. So now we'll lay it down, I'll put the snap ring in. Haven't done one of these in a while, so Brent, wear eye protection. Let's see if you can see that. Alright. So you have this little guy here, so the open end can never go on there, but you always want this to be relatively close, so if you have to pop them out, it's kind of serviceable. Actually, let's see what the other side looks like, because that's still a factory install. Well, looks like they don't pay that much attention to that, but you can kind of see where it's open over there. But let's try my snap ring installation tool here. I've used factory rings in a long time. So excuse me for stumbling around. I should have videoed the last one I was doing, not the first one. A lot of pistons use different types of snap rings. Like typical forged pistons will use like a spiral lock, where this is a simple circlip. And there you go. Boom. Although I'm too close to this edge right here. See that? Right right there. That's right there. That's not good. I need to take that out and reset that. And again, go slow, don't scratch the piston, and definitely don't lose control of it because it will fly across a shop or poke out an eye. Make sure it's snapped in. See in there. Always check to make sure it's in the groove. And you can kind of see right there that it's completely in the groove. And if you're not sure, you can just kind of look around and you can see it in the groove in there too, right? So the distance there to there is the same all the way around. So here is assembly number 1. Brent.
Yes, sir.
Check this and make sure that I'm correct with cylinder 1. And cylinder 1 is the closest one to you on the left side.
Alright, so the arrow needs to point towards the timing or the front of the motor.
So just so you guys can see this, right? So here's a little arrow. You can see that.
This one's
Oh,
a
wait.
little easier to see.
Let's see.
If you can catch it in the light, the little
So
arrow.
right there's the arrow, and then here is there's our crank pulley right there for the timing belt. So all of those are going to face the front. So the other side, it will just be flipped around and go the other way. So now, assuming I'm right, Brent, let me know if that's right.
This is correct.
All right, so now we repeat that. So we just looked at the rod. This is the same piston from the rod we just looked at. And you can kind of see the, you can see that, let's see. How it just wants to just, so you can't pay that much attention to this area here, right? Because when you're taking these in and out, you put a little tiny nick in that, and it'll give you a little resistance. So you have to make sure you're not on that, but you can just see how nicely that moves around. And also, like, rotation-wise, right? And you can just feel I don't know, I guess maybe I've done so many of these, you just know when it feels happy. There's not any movement anywhere. Yeah, anyways. Happy wristband. Alright, let's try putting the snap ring in again. I'm a little bit better practice now. This is cylinder 5, so let's show you guys this with a little bit more warm up. You can see that okay? Let's see. Alright, so I seat it in there away from that groove, and I like to keep it not 180 degrees away because it's easier to take out this way, and I think that's enough to keep it secure. You see that? So the end is right there. Now I've used my finger and I put force there. And you can see this part here. You can use a little screwdriver. And you use your thumb and your finger to push down. It's also a safety that if you lose it, it's not going to fly across the room. There. Such a satisfying sound. And then you can just grab the wrist pin and just turn it really easily. Let me see if you can see the side of the writing. Just happy. So now rings go on. So these gaps, when this is installed, this gap right here, you can kind of see this apart. So when this goes in, you note where this part is. This is where it separates. And then the oil control ring goes opposite that, the opening, so it goes like that. Right? Anyways, that's how you put it on the piston. Put it on now. Let's see. So expand it. Oop. Now these are really low tension, so you can almost use your fingers to pick them up. So if you're careful, you don't need to use your ring expander. And the compression and the scraper ring on these Audi turbo pistons are really stiff, and a ring tool really helps that a lot. Let's see if we can show that. Here's the middle ring, which is the scraper ring like we showed you. You can see the little bevel right there, or little cutout. And then there's it says top there, usually where the name is, and it's top. Usually on a German stuff that faces up. How do YouTube dorks do this? I kind of feel like holding it in position for the camera is just awkward. Maybe it's where I have the camera. Anyways, I'll have to watch you guys. Maybe Rob Don will give me a tutoring lesson. Go slow, sneak up on it, because you just have to be really careful not to overexpand the rings. You don't want to stretch them out. See, I did 5 of these without struggling, but now I'm showing everybody. Here we are. We make sure everything turns. We didn't put any burrs in anything. I'm very happy at this point. Now that I put the snap rings in, I make sure the wrist pin moves nicely. Put a little bit of oil on this. We move on to the next hole. I'm just going to keep recording since I stumbled a bit on that one. Let's see if we can do cylinder 6 with a little less effort. Let's do this from top to bottom. So I've already kind of pin fit this to verify that it's happy, that the pin bore and the connecting rod and the wrist pin together are reasonable. So we showed you last time like how, right? Make sure the piston is happy with the wrist pin. Alright. Now, There. Satisfying snap. Make sure it's in the groove. Let's make sure the wrist pin still floats happy. And it does. And that is cylinder 6. And now, because this particular engine, depending on which bank, the pistons are clocked 180 degrees differently, I'm just going to verify that we didn't make any mistakes. Alright, so let's talk about the connecting rod bearings here. So on this SRM rod, you can see it's got little dowels, and the tangs, those guys, are always on the same side. Now, when I put these in, first thing I do is I check for any burrs anywhere, also on the bearing. You know, when you took it out of the package, if you weren't careful, you could have put a little dent or something down here, and you know, you'd want to hit that with a small file if that happened, but better just to be careful. But you know, so look at that little. Everything's happy. So bearing tang to tang. Alright. And then just gonna make sure it's centered. So it's not cocked like this way. Right? You wanna make sure it's at the same angle as the cap. And then you just push it down. And it should flush up. Alright. Assembly lube. So we're going to assemble cylinders 1 and 5 first. I'm going to check. I'm going to put one cylinder in. Put cylinder 1 in. We're going to check for clearance on the oil squirter. And we should probably do cylinder 5 also. We'll do 1 and 5. And we'll check, we'll eyeball that and make sure everything's got plenty of room for the cylinder rod to the piston. Piston stock, it should be fine. But the rod may be bigger in some dimension we're not expecting, and we need to see where that is relative to anything it's going to interfere with. If it interferes with the bottom of the block or cast iron, you build a stroker sometimes, you have to clearance certain parts of the block or an intermediate shaft or something like that. And you're constantly looking for that if you're changing things like that. But in this case, all we're changing is the rod. So the main thing we need to look for is whether our larger rod is interfering with anything. Let's just handle that together for a minute. And this is not the fancy ARP assembly lube, but we're going to put that on when we actually assemble everything on the threads. So let's keep these together for now. Okay, so we need to make sure that the rod at the bottom of the bore doesn't touch here to here, because this rod is fatter and you want to make sure we have space. Lots around. See if you can see that. You see that? Plenty of space there. Let's check the other side. Let's get an angle on the other side. Oh, that's a good view of our squirter. I wanted to look at that in the piston to make sure it was going to the bottom of the piston and not going to touch. Oops, my nose touched the camera. So let's see if we can see that. I had a good view of it a minute ago. There's the squirter. Counterweight's in the way. The reason you check this, even though it's a factory piston, is what if one of these got bent somehow? You know? It's hard to check that.